Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. I hope everybody had a good week and got all the things done that you needed to do and is feeling well. So welcome back, and today we are talking about obviously changing gears a little bit from the last few weeks and going to talk about Eurythmics. I'm going to showcase my collection of Eurythmics and show you a little bit of Annie Lennox solo stuff. Yeah, but really primarily focus on the career of Eurythmics. So I've got quite a little bit to show you, just not a lot of updates for me, just a typical work week last week, and you know, productive and efficient and all those good things. So again, I hope everyone's feeling good and looking forward to, I can't believe we're already in the second week of February. It feels like it was just New Year's Day yesterday, and time is going so fast this year, and kind of hope in a way it slows down a little bit, but you know, I think we all have a little bit of spring fever and ready for some warm weather. I know many of you have been suffering through terrible bouts of blizzards and snow in the East Coast and Midwest, and here in Central Texas it's pretty pleasant and not a lot to complain about weather-wise, so we're pretty fortunate. So today I think it's supposed to be about 80 degrees, so can't complain living in Austin in the winter. It's the summers here that are pretty torturous, but you'll hear probably about that when the time comes. So anyway, we're going to get right to it and talk about Annie Lennox and Dave Stewart, who make up Eurythmics. They formed really in 1980, but they were part of a different band previously, the two of them. Well, first of all, they were romantically linked during the first portion of their career. They met, I believe, in 1975 in a cafe in London, and you know, just typical conversation, musical similarities, and had both artistic and creative, you know, the same type of you know, mentality, I guess you could say, and decided to form a band. So originally they were called The Catch. I don't have anything from them. I'm assuming some things exist, probably on vinyl, maybe some 45s. I'm not sure if they ever actually released a full album or not. But that band kind of formed into what most people know of the first band that Annie and Dave were part of, and that is the Tourists. And I do not have a copy to show you of their debut album. It was a self-titled debut album called The Tourists. But I do have their second and third albums on vinyl. This one is called, I'm sorry, it's backwards, Reality Effect. And really, actually very good album. This was a 5-piece band. You can see Annie Lennox here, and I'm not exactly sure which one Dave is, to be honest with you, in this photo. He looked so different at the time. I believe it's this gentleman here. But you know, that was the formation of some of the early sound of Eurythmics, and they did have some moderate success in the UK. This album is from 1980, and it has, let's see, this didn't really have the songs on it that I guess you could say, made them semi-famous in the UK. They were primarily known for a couple of tracks. They had a couple top 10 hits in the UK. One of them was a cover song, and I believe it's on their next album called Luminous Basement here. And also came out in the same year. You can see Annie Lennox here, and this is Dave Stewart. He's starting to look more like himself, or what we know of Dave. And I'm not too familiar with the other gentlemen in the band. Apparently, from what I read, they kind of fell out of music. They tried to form another band after this, and it never took off, and kind of drifted out of music. But it was Dave and Annie that carried on and formed Eurythmics after the Tourists. And I do believe this one has the singles on it that they're somewhat famous for. I'm going to have to refer back to my notes here and see if I can find this. Let's see, Never Gonna Cry Again hit number 63 in the UK, and they had a cover song, trying to think of what it was. Gosh, I'm just not seeing it on the album, and I'm not seeing it here on my notes either. Let me just click this here and see if I can find it for you guys. Let's see, they had I Only Want to Be With You, that's what it was. And I don't even think it's on either of these albums, and that's kind of sad, because that is a great song. I don't know who originally wrote that song or who made it famous, but Oh, it is track 2 on this album here. So I do have that. So, you know, they were good, and these are 2 good albums, and I go back to them, you know, occasionally, not that often, but I do enjoy it quite a lot. And you know, you do get, like I was saying, you get a little bit of a taste and flair of what Eurythmics were going to sound like. Now, Dave and Annie were not the principal songwriters of that band, and I guess that was part of the tension that was building up between the tourists. There were some creative differences, and you know, the usual royalties problems and all the things that are associated with typical rock and roll things, and they disbanded shortly after their 3rd album. And obviously went on, 2 of them, and Dave and Annie, went on to form Eurythmics. And their debut album, most people assume, not most, but a fair portion of people still think that Sweet Dreams Are Made of This is their first album, but it isn't. They actually had an album prior to that called In the Garden, and this was the debut album, quite different than their follow-up, which we'll talk about in a little bit. This is more of a progressive krautrock album, really, to be honest with you. And it did spawn some hits here, actually. Never Gonna Cry Again was a top 10 UK hit. Never got any airplay or any you know, publicity here in the U.S. It just kind of came and went, and no one knew about it. But it is a very solid album, and just not quite what you would expect if you're familiar with the rest of Eurythmics, because it is quite different. Again, it's more of a progressive rock album, and has some really good songs on it, though. And if you haven't heard this, I think you can pick this vinyl up relatively inexpensive, and you can certainly get the CD without too much difficulty. So this was the kind of the humble beginnings of Eurythmics, and then from there on, as we know, most everything else I'm going to show you is you know, fairly common, and most people have at least heard of them and know some of their hits, especially in my generation, who grew up in the 80s and 90s. So you know, and then of course we all know after In the Garden came this album, Sweet Dreams Are Made of This. This was their breakthrough album, and the title track from this album was a worldwide smash hit. Went #1, I think, in 17 countries, and really paved the way for that whole genre of the second British invasion. It was just bubbling up at the time, and they actually just exploded and crashed the scene, and were different, very, very different, and their videos were unique and obscure and androgynous. And Annie Lennox created this persona about her that to this day, really, people still talk about and still kind of admire her for being unique and an individual, and some strong opinions and things of that nature. This album, every single track on this album is just fantastic. It also was the song, one of the songs I was playing in the intro of this video is The City Never Sleeps, was the last song on the album. And it's just a perfect synth pop album. You know, in many ways they probably never recaptured the feel of this album entirely, but they went on to do many other great things. And this is not my personal favorite Eurythmics album, but this is the one that started it all, and it's hard to not talk about it in the greatest possible light, because it paved the way for so many other bands, and the sound at the time was fresh and unique, and I'd never heard anything like it. So just a dynamite record, and if you've never checked out Eurythmics, you know, this obviously is the perfect place to start. And you know, what a breakthrough it was. So great album, and I highly recommend it. So from there, you know, back in those times, albums were kind of still churning out at a very quick pace, and you know, they followed it up pretty much within, I think, 11 months with their follow-up in 1983, Touch. And this happens to be my personal favorite Eurythmics album. This one is just an absolute classic album. I love the artwork, I love the cover, just absolutely fantastic. And one of the great characteristics of Annie Lennox is the emotion she can create, not only with her lyrics and the way she sings it, but just her facial expressions and her eyes. You know, there are several videos of her where really they just focus on her face, and she does very little other than just eye movements and just very simple facial expressions, and it's just so fantastic the way she tells a story just through her facial movements and her eyes. And You know, there really is no one quite like her, and even to this day she still does a lot of the same trademark movements and theatrical things that she does with her face. And this album has great songs on it. Here Comes the Rain Again, Here Comes the Rain Again, Cool Blue, Who's That Girl, The First Cut, Paint a Rumor. I mean, it's only got 9 songs, but every single one of them is an absolute classic. This was also my first experience seeing Eurythmics live. They've done 5 world tours throughout their career, and I've been very fortunate enough to see every one of them. And another great characteristic of Eurythmics is how fantastic they are live. They actually kind of turned into more of a band than a duo. In the early days it was mostly Dave on synthesizer and Annie singing, and it was very synth-driven, and then from there it kind of mutated and formed into more of a band sound. We'll get to that in a little bit, but back in the early days on this tour it was perfect. You know, for me, because I love synth pop and I love that whole genre of electronica music. Howard Jones, another favorite of mine, opened for them on that tour, and it was a memorable, something I'll never forget. And, you know, fell in love with them at a very high level at that point. They did release also, this isn't really a studio album, this is a remix album called Touch Dance. This is a bunch of dance remixes of Eurythmics' Touch. Really, really fantastic. It has the same songs on it, the same 9 songs, but they're all done a little bit differently. Some extended mixes, and you know, it was very popular at that time to do that thing, you know, to release 12-inch singles, and this is, you know, basically the full album on 12-inch single. Fantastic. If you've never heard this, it's definitely worth getting. And you know, you can see a live picture of how they looked at the time. So very, very cool, and I go back to this often, so great to have a copy of that. From there, you know, their career kind of stalled a little bit, to be honest with you, because they got kind of gypped, if I'm being honest. They got contracted, and you know, they were meant to be a big part of this movie, 1984, and they actually got cut out of the movie, except for the ending credits. They did play one track, which is a fantastic song on the album called Julia, but the rest of the songs never made the film, and apparently the director either wasn't fond of the music or decided to go in a different direction and use the original orchestrated soundtrack to the film. But this is, you know, obviously a very popular George Orwell book, and turned it into a movie of the same year, 1984, and it has some great songs on it that, at least in America, got very little airplay. The main song on this was called Sex Crime, and because of the explicit nature of it and the title Sex Crime, even though it's a very popular phrase in the book, everyone knows it who's read that book. Typical American audiences took that as you know, something that needed to be banned from radio, and it got pulled. This was actually pulled from the shelves, actually. The entire record, because of legal issues. Eurythmics and the director of the film had some issues with it, and you know, it was never part of the movie, really, but they did go ahead and release the album, and unfortunately it just never really took off. But those are the 2 big standout tracks on it. The Sex Crime, fantastic song, great video, and Julia. And that song, Julia, I'll put a link in the description box to that video, because it's a perfect example of what I was saying previously about how it's a very simple video, yet she can do so much with her facial expressions and eye movements, and just the way she, the camera loves Annie Lennox. And it's a very simple video, but it's a very telling story, and it's definitely worth watching. So from there they kind of rebounded a little bit, at least, with their next album called Savage. And again, a very different type of album for Eurythmics. They kind of abandoned in a little bit of way their synth pop sound on the next one, and started going more into a band sound direction. The standout track on this is on the sticker here, I Need a Man and Shame were the 2 singles that were released from this album. And I Need a Man is a funny, funny song. If you've never heard that song, I definitely would check it out. And another great, great video. I mean, Annie, I don't think she's ever really done film, but she should do some acting. in my opinion, because she plays a character throughout this entire album. You can see that, you know, she's got the blonde wig and the long nails and the heavy, heavy makeup, and that's not her at all, you know, in real life. So she's playing a character throughout this whole album of, you know, a typical bleach blonde, you know, kind of a loose woman, I guess you could say. And, you know, does a fabulous job, especially in the videos. You know, and back in the day, MTV, of course, was very, very huge, and video was a huge portion of what people were doing. The first song, Beethoven, I love to listen to, is terrific. That is a little bit of a synth pop song. I've Got a Lover Back in Japan, Do You Really Want to Break Up, Shame and Savage, and then the first song on the B-side is I Need a Man. And then the last song on here is an a cappella song called Brand New Day. It's just Annie singing. There's nothing else to it, and it's just dynamite. I don't know if you've ever heard that one, but I would recommend checking that one out. Just fantastic song. And it's, again, very, very simple, stripped down, but it's just wonderful. Didn't have great commercial success with that one here in the U.S. I think it was a top 10 album in the U.K., and I was a little bit worried that their career was sidetracked a little bit after the massive success of their first two albums. They had kind of a 2-album span where they weren't doing so well on the charts. And then from there, it blew up again. So we'll get to the next album, which is Be Yourself Tonight. And this was chock full of hits. And this is the time period where they really went with the band sound. They didn't abandon the keyboards and synthesizer entirely, but Dave Stewart's guitar playing really overtook this album. And completely different sound, again, reinventing themselves and becoming modern again for the time. This is chock full of hits that actually has their one and only #1 UK hit, which is Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves with Aretha Franklin. And that song was originally meant to be Annie and Tina Turner. And Tina Turner declined, so they went with Aretha Franklin, and I think it was, you know, history was made at that time because it's, you know, it was a perfect pairing. You know, Aretha being the great soul singer she is, and Annie, you know, kind of a perfect white soul singer. Just a perfect match and marriage of the two of them. Would I Lie to You is a big, big hit on this. And really the second side of this album is just perfect in my opinion. And you really get a good flavor of Dave Stewart's guitar playing on this. Probably the one album where he stands out the most in my opinion. Conditioned Soul, Adrian, It's Alright, Baby's Coming Back. Here Comes That Sinking Feeling, and Better to Have Loved, and better. This is a tough one here. Better to have lost in love than never to have loved at all. Those songs really feature Dave. Of course, it's Annie singing, but you know, it's his instrumentation and guitar work on this album that stands out to me. One of my favorite Eurythmics albums, in my opinion. I would recommend that you check that out if you haven't. And then that was a huge commercial success. And then they had another big, big commercial album with Revenge. And this carried on again with the band sound. This was probably their biggest world tour. This was probably the peak after Sweet Dreams. This was, again, another big peak for Eurythmics, chart success-wise. I think they had 5 top 10 singles off this album, maybe 6, and did a massive, massive world tour, and you know, filled stadiums at that time, you know, with this album. So I think this is about the time too people were really starting to put them at a different level of something that would stand the test of time. It wasn't going to be just an 80s thing. It was going to be something that would last a lot longer. So, you know, many 80s artists, as everyone knows, kind of fell by the wayside, and that genre is labeled as 80s music, and people could never get out of it. This Eurythmics is one of the exceptions that carried on and had great success after the Eurythmics, or after the 80s. Missionary Man, Thorn on My Side, When Tomorrow Comes, The Miracle of Love, Take Your Pain Away, and Let's Go. Those were the singles off this album, so a great commercial success for Eurythmics and a very fun album. So it probably ranks a little bit low for me, actually, in the catalog of Eurythmics. only because the songs were played and played and played to the point where, you know, you just don't enjoy listening to them as much as some of the other albums that didn't have as much success. And when you hear them, they still sound a little bit more fresh. But terrific album, and I think it is worthy to check out. And then they had one last album before they kind of took a very long hiatus, and this is called We Two Are One. This came out in, let's see if I can read this here without going back to my notes. I think it was 1991 or 1992. And this was not a huge commercial success, and probably my least favorite Eurythmics albums. And, you know, that's not saying anything bad about it. It's a good album. But it didn't quite live up to the expectations of some of their others. And, you know, the sticker here says it was a bold new beginning for Eurythmics, and it actually turned out to be kind of the end in a way, too. So, did have some singles on here. They had changed record labels, too, at the time, and I think that may be part of the reason why it stalled a little bit on the chart. They had left RCA and went over to Arista Records. But it did have some great songs on here. Don't Ask Me Why, Angel, My Baby's Gonna Cry, which is a really, really good song, and the King and Queen of America, and the last song on here is Revival, which is another kind of anthem-type song. And, you know, no one knew it at the time that this would be kind of their last studio album for quite some time. But I was a little down on this album for a very, very long period of time, and it has grown on me over the years. Great picture of Dave there. And, you know, actually, even though I say it's my least favorite Eurythmics album, it's still a very, very good album, and I would recommend listening to it. And then I'll show you this real quick, because this is kind of a summary of all of that. This is a recent music on vinyl issue of their greatest hits. This is a double album, and this was never released on vinyl until I think 2012 or 2013 when Music on Vinyl put this out. And I'm really, really happy to have it, because, you know, sometimes you just want to hear the hits, and it's great to have it. And anyone who knows this label, Music on Vinyl, they do a wonderful job of remastering and pressing things to wax. So this came out in, 2010. It's got every hit on here. You know, there's, I think, about 28 songs on here, and every one of them was a hit in some capacity. So, you know, what a great thing to have. If you only are mildly interested in Eurythmics, this would be something to definitely check out. There's a CD you can probably get in the dollar bin. But if you're a vinyl lover like me, this is kind of a must-have. And it is an amazing sounding record. So I would start there if you want to just kind of hear the hits. Then they kind of took a long break. And I don't know if I should talk about the solo career first or just finish off Eurythmics. Let me just finish off Eurythmics, I guess, and talk about, you know, Annie went off to do her solo stuff and had some huge success. We'll get to that in a second. And then in 1999, they decided to reform Eurythmics and put out an album which is absolutely wonderful. This is called Peace. Unfortunately, this was never released on vinyl, but it's a terrific record. And, you know, it was a perfect album for the time, because in the late 90s, early 2000s, you know, people were a little bit worried about the turn of the century and things of that nature. And this album really summarized the mood and the feeling of the time, you know. And Annie is such a philanthropist and lover of, you know, making her name known and getting involved. And, you know, she's highly, highly involved in so many different charities, particularly outspoken about AIDS research and Africa famine relief and things of that nature. And a lot of the proceeds of this album and this tour went to some of her charities. So, you know, Annie is a beautiful person, not only vocally, but as a human being. She is one of the greatest, you know, voices for music. And if more artists could aspire to be like her, I think that we'd all be better off. So anyway, that's my little speech about Annie and her work. But check out her Facebook page and her website. She's very, very active on Facebook, and she writes a lot of great essays and stories, and to this day, very active. So this particular copy of the CD, if you're wondering where it came from, comes from a beautiful box set of their entire catalog. This came out in 2005 in the UK only. And every CD on here, it's the same records I just showed you, but it has that same format of the double gatefold. And, you know, it has 2 CDs, one of the original album, another of a lot of B-sides. So just absolutely love it. And some photos that had never been released before, and they're all, of course, coinciding with the way they looked during the era that these were recorded. So it's just a wonderful box set, and I'm so pleased to have it. And I've had it for close to 10 years now, but yeah, I've really coveted it and cherished it because it is just absolutely fantastic, and something, if you can find one, would highly recommend it as a great CD version of all these different albums. So that kind of wraps things up for Eurythmics. They have recently got together. They've did a Paul McCartney tribute concert in 2014, and Dave and Annie got together and did Fool on the Hill, which was, that's on YouTube. Maybe I'll find that and put a link in the description box for that one too. But it was just great to see them together again. And, you know, actually even the Wikipedia page is a little bit inaccurate. If you ask Annie or Dave, they're still great friends to this day. They've never broken up. They've just decided to do other things, and, you know, who knows? They've never ruled out that they could get back together again. They've never had a falling out, which is really remarkable if you think about it, because, you know, being romantically involved in the first 3 years of the Tourists and then breaking up right at the formation of Eurythmics and having a career after that, it's almost unheard of. You know, artists just don't do that. So to have, you know, a romantic partnership end and a musical partnership begin at the same time is very unusual. But they are great friends, and have both gone on to do wonderful things on their own. Dave Stewart is a highly sought-after music producer, and to this day is producing things for Ringo Starr, Jeff Lynne, and is very, very active in the producing end of things. He has had some solo albums of his own. I personally do not have them, but it is kind of been thinking about being on my wish list to at least pick up the CDs, because they're very inexpensive, just to hear how he's been faring on his own without Annie musically. He has a great career, though, nothing to worry about. And then, of course, there's Annie Lennox and her solo career. And in the effort of time, you know, we're pushing 29 minutes here. I think I will not show you the solo stuff of Annie Lennox. I've got everything, and I just want to show you one. I'll show you one thing, because this is what I consider almost like a desert island album for me. It's one of my greatest albums of all time, and this was her solo debut, Annie Lennox, Diva. This album is a total masterpiece. It's heartfelt, and it's emotional, it's raw, and it is her swan song. I don't know if she'll ever be able to top this album, because it is so good. It is the #1 album for me of the entire decade in the 90s, and to this day, every time I hear it, I almost get chills. It's just so, so good. And she's gone on to do many other great albums, but this is the one that if you hear nothing else of Eurythmics or Annie, if you're not interested in it at all, do yourself a favor and at least hear this one, because it is so good. I just can't tell you how many times I refer back to that album and say, music doesn't get better than this. Between the songwriting and the instrumentation and the production and the video and how it all ties together, I mean, it's just perfect. It is the perfect album. So with that, I think I'll leave it. I've got all the other Annie Lennox solo stuff, and maybe that will be a future video. But in the effort of time and trying to keep these reasonably short, I'll end it there. And again, I thank you so much for watching. My channel is doing pretty good for a brand new channel. Getting new subscribers every week, little by little. You know, I hope you're enjoying the videos. I enjoy making them. I'm having fun with it. And I look forward to the next few. I've got, I think, the next 4 weeks lined up already. So I'll still take suggestions if you want, but I think it's going to be pushed back a little bit because I've got the next 4 already in my head ready to go. So please hit like, make a comment, and subscribe if you haven't so far. I'd really appreciate it. And again, I thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next week. Take care, guys. Bye now.